the precepts of God are at the service of the practice of love. That the commandments of God guide the way you love. Love, we'll talk about it in a second. Let's just take a look at this passage from Romans 13, beginning with verse 8 and 9, where St. Paul wrote to them, probably fairly soon after writing Galatians. Pretty soon, they're very close to each other in time, most likely. But in Romans 13, verse 8, he says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law," the commandments, such as, "You shall not commit adultery, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not covet," and any other commandment are summed up in this sentence, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." So, if you love your neighbor, you won't kill them. If you love your neighbor, you won't commit adultery against them or with them. If you love your neighbor, you won't steal their stuff. You may ask, "May I have a piece of cake?" But you won't break in their house and take their cakes. You don't do that, not if you love them. And so on. So that the commandments, the love is a choice that comes from inside. The commandments give it guidance. And St. Augustine reflects on that in his In Johannis Evangelium Tractatus, which is his tractate on the Gospel of John, book 41, paragraph 10. St. Augustine wrote, says someone, "Why is it not completed liberty to obey the law?" See, that's Augustine's point. Obeying the law is not complete freedom. He's not saying that the gospel doesn't say that. Why not? "Because I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind. For what I would," he says, "that I do not, but what I hate, that I do. The flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. So that you do not the things that you would do." So this is a quotation from Romans chapter 7, verse 14 and following. St. Paul had the same problem most of us have. We want to do what's right, but there's a war inside of us saying, no. I was so good during Lent, and I gave up all this stuff. Boy, those cakes sure look good now. And what is a piece of cake without some ice cream on top? And we want to have, all that good stuff. And of course, there's room for enjoyment, but anybody who goes on a diet knows how difficult that is. And if it's true with a diet, it's also true with various areas of sin. We want to be good. How many people try to stop gossiping? How many people try to stop having lustful thoughts? How many people try to stop coveting and being envious of what other people have? But it's difficult because there's an interior disorder. So St. Augustine goes on. "In part liberty, in part bondage. Not yet entire, not yet pure, not yet full liberty, because not yet eternity. For we still have infirmity in part. In part we have attained to liberty." So sometimes I can manage to be good for a little bit. But sustaining it is not so easy. I've been really good. I didn't gossip anybody all for the last 10 minutes. And sometimes that's what we have to do. Take avoidance of sin 5 minutes, 1 minute at a time. I know alcoholics who will say, "I stopped drinking 1 minute at a time." Because if an alcoholic says, "Oh, I can't drink for the rest of my life," it becomes overwhelming. They say, "Oh, that's too much. I got to have a drink." And so that's very common. But if they say, "I'm going to stop drinking for the next 5 minutes," then that they can handle. Sometimes that's all we can deal with. 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes, an hour at a time, as we get better and better. Because we have this mixture inside of us. St. Augustine goes on. whatever has been our sin was previously wiped out in baptism. So baptism forgives original sin, and if you're an adult, any actual sins. And he had plenty. He wrote them down, that's how I know. But because all our iniquities have been blotted out, has there remained no infirmity? If there had not, we should be living here without sin. Yet, who would venture to say so? But the proud. Prideful people say, well, I don't have any sin. And that's why I don't ask them, I ask their spouses. But the man unworthy of the deliverer's mercy, people unworthy of God's mercy, they say, I don't need to be forgiven. He who wishes to be self-deceived. Now, they say, I don't have any sin. And people who are destitute of the truth. Yeah, I don't have any sin. They don't know the truth about themselves. Therefore, from the fact that some infirmity remains, I venture to say that in what measure we serve God, we are free. In what measure we serve the law of sin, we are still in bondage. So that whenever we sin, that indicates that we're still not free. When we serve God freely, then we give up that, we find more freedom. He goes on in paragraph 18, those who, quote, live by the flesh. It's a phrase from St. Paul. What he means by the flesh is not the body. There's nothing wrong with being in the body, but the flesh is something else. In St. Paul's language and in Jesus, too, he uses the same phrase, because the flesh corrupts. If you leave some meat out over, in the heat overnight, you don't want to eat it. It stinks. And that's a symbol, they use that as a sign of the corruption in our personality. Being in a body, this is our nature, body and spirit. But, we have this corrupting quality. And people who live by that, who want to gratify the desires of the flesh, the desires of pure instinct without thinking things through, without reason. Whatever comes to my mind, whatever feeling, whatever instinct comes to the foreground, I guess I got to go with it because I can't help myself. I got these instincts. I got these instincts to eat too much, instincts to have sex outside of control, and so on. Those people look at life and God's law as a burden. People who live by the flesh see that God's law is a burden. And they focus on how, well, God's law is a restriction of my freedom. Who does God think he is to tell me what to do? That's not, and besides, those are men's laws. Remember the temptation by the serpent. Did God really tell you not to eat from any fruit in the garden? God does that because he has bad motives. That's what's wrong. And you should do what you want. That's the fleshly mentality. On the other hand, those who are impelled by love and walk by the Spirit and desire to serve others, find in God's law the fundamental and necessary way in which to practice love as something freely chosen and freely lived out. He cites Galatians 5:16 to refer to those who walk by the Spirit. In that paragraph of Galatians 5, he sets those who are by the flesh, those who are by the Spirit. And that's why St. Paul says, I say, walk by the Spirit and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. Just like leaving meat outside in the heat will necessarily leading it to rot, if you follow the desires of the flesh, you will rot. And then it gets worse from there. So this is something that they have to deal with. They feel an interior urge, a necessity, and no longer a form of coercion, not to stop at the minimum demands of the law, but to live the law in their fullness. So that it's not just that I don't want to kill, The people who live by the Spirit, that's what he's talking about. People who live by the Spirit. Don't just say, well, I won't kill. No. They want to know, what can I do to support life? Help encourage life. That's why doctors and nurses and parents do what they can to give of themselves to support life. And other people too, of course. And that you go beyond just not bearing false witness, you seek out the truth and make sure you tell the truth. So you don't stop at the minimum demands, but want the fullness of God's law. This is still an uncertain and fragile journey while we're on earth. But we can make this journey, avoiding the flesh and going more and more towards the Spirit of God. You can do so if we keep seeking the grace of God. We can't do this on our own. We need God's grace to do what is right and good. We're too weak, but God gives us grace to enable us to possess the full freedom of the children of God that Paul spoke of in Romans 8:21. That creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. That's what we seek. A liberty to be good, a freedom to be good, and thus live our moral way of life in a way worthy of our vocation as the children of God. Think for a second. Why do we have to take off our shoes, carry small bottles of liquids on a plane, and go through screening? Why do we have to do that? It wasn't just 20 years ago. People waiting for you could go up to the gate and meet you at the gate. Why do we do that? Because the sins of terrorists have limited our freedom. This is a classic example of how sin curtails freedom. When people did virtue, you had more freedom to go up to the plane. Today you have less freedom. Why do you have so many more gun controls? Because people have used guns to kill unjustly. And so you see, just go through any of the ways that we've done things. Sin keeps limiting our freedom. And this is the way that it goes. So we have a vocation to perfect love. And this vocation is not just for a few Christians. Well, some of you can be perfect and the others can be so-so. Remember, there used to be a movement in psychology, I'm okay, you're okay. And then somebody at one of the houses I lived in had a coffee cup, said, I'm okay, you're okay, he's so-so. No, nobody is called to be so-so as a Christian. All of us are called to be perfect. In this invitation to go sell your possessions, give the money to the poor, and the promise you will have treasure in heaven is meant for everyone because they bring out the full meaning of the commandment of love a neighbor. So, I mean, and is it just applied to priests, nuns, and religious monks and brothers? No. Again, all of you who have children, do you win big prizes and get a lot of money when you have kids? Or you get a lot of sickness because they bring it home from their friends. You get a lot of colds, flu, and everything else that goes through the classroom. But you are giving of yourself for your kids, are you not? This is a good example. I mean, they're born naked, usually crying, and you start giving your stuff to them because, well, you know, I think if I wait long enough, it'll be a good investment. No, it's because you love them. That's where the perfect love is there for us to give to the poor, including